Right. Today I'm keen to chuck a pretty simple question your way. There were these two blokes, right? Both dead careful, real thoughtful, and they'd spent years getting prepped for everything to go belly up. One of them pulled through, but the other fella, he didn't. The first fella, he was living right on the outskirts of Caracas. Back in 2015, he'd got gold coins tucked away in a floor safe, 3 months of rice and beans, a veggie patch, a small Jenny, and a couple of loyal dogs. So, when the bolivar went kaput, he was right as rain. He'd flog his gold coins off one at a time and trade eggs for his meds. He's a bit skinnier, got less cash, more knackered, but he's still breathing. He's safe and sound at his own joint. Now, the other fella, he lived in a pretty swish apartment in Sarajevo. By March '92, he had the exact same gold coins, the same stashed grub, and the same do-it-yourself way of thinking. His neighbors all reckoned he was a top bloke. Only 3 weeks later, Serbian artillery started firing from the hills overlooking the city. His gold was no good for buying things that simply weren't around. His stored flour got nicked in the first week, fair dinkum. His flat's window was facing Grabovica. A sniper shot his wife dead while she was heading to the water tap. Both fellas got ready. One prepped the right way, the other got ready for the wrong kind of disaster. And that's what we'll be having a yarn about today, because there are two completely different sorts of things going bust. Most of the stuff you've read quietly lumps them together. The prepper mob, they just lump them all in as one thing, eh? Nah, mate, they're not one thing. They're two completely different physics problems, and the strategy that'll save your bacon in one will totally do you in for the other. Right, so the traditional story, it goes like this. Things go belly up, the system breaks down, and the trucks just stop. The shelves are bare. You'll need tucker, water, a shooter, and a bit of a plan. The survivalist industry, they'll sort you out with all four of those. You grab yourself a retreat property, build a pantry, and dig a well. You bury some gold out in the yard, call it your homestead, and then you just wait. And in this traditional yarn, gold's gold, no matter what kind of strife you're facing. Food storage is just food storage, plain and simple. A fixed address with a full larder and a rifle by the door is seen as the answer to every single question. Does that make sense, eh? This is the image most people have in their heads. This is what thousands of YouTube channels are spruiking. This is what the catalog wants you to believe, mate. But here's the rub with this story. The bloke in Caracas, he did fine with his gold, his garden, and his fixed address. The bloke in Sarajevo, he died. They had identical preparations, but they faced totally different collapses. Righto, the biggest stuff up in how folks think about survival these days is chucking those two scenarios into the same basket. I'll just spell out these two types of collapse for you, real clear like. Now this bit's a fair dinkum big deal. Type 1. That's when the economy goes belly up. The money's no good, and getting your hands on stuff becomes a nightmare. Banks either shut their doors or act like they're still open, all while nicking your cash on the sly. But the government, she's still around, mate. The coppers still get their pay, though sometimes it's a bit of cash under the counter. The courts are still chugging along, but they're slow, a bit dodgy, and rotten to the core. Your property rights? Nah, they're only looked after when it suits them. Life just keeps ticking over, but it's a fair bit rougher than before. Have a think about Weimar Germany back in 21 to 23, or Argentina in 2001, Venezuela from 2013 right up to now, Lebanon since 2019, and Zimbabwe in '08. Now, type 2, that's a military meltdown. The government loses its hold on the rough stuff. You've got proper fighting, sieges, foreign blokes taking over, and just staying safe. It's not your cash, tucker, or petrol that's the main thing deciding if you'll make it. It's your safety. Anything you've got that's good for type 1? Yeah, that just turns into a bloody problem. Stashed gold just paints a target on your back. Your place, your home address, that's now a known spot for trouble. A pantry chockers with grub? That's just asking for blokes with guns to come knocking. Picture Stalingrad in 42, Leningrad from 41 to 44, Warsaw in 44, Berlin in 45, or Sarajevo from 92 to 96. So these two types of collapse, they're a whole different kettle of fish, different rules, different time frames, and you gotta react differently for each. I'll show you with what's happened in history. Righto, let's kick off with the economic meltdowns, eh? I reckon you'll want to spot the pattern over these 5 examples, because that pattern's way more telling than just one case on its own. First up, Weimar Germany, from 21 to 23. Back in January of 21, a single US dollar would have snagged you 65 marks. But by November 23, that same dollar was worth a whopping 4.21 trillion marks. Just have a think about what that actually means, mate. Prices were fair dinkum doubling every single day in September that year. A Sheila named Erna von Pustow, who saw it all, gave us the lowdown on what went on. The big companies were pricing their stuff in gold, but but they were paying their workers with those dodgy, inflated marks. The ones who really copped it were the middle-class folks on wages, the pensioners, and anyone who'd saved a bit. Imagine spending 3 decades building up your savings, only to see it all disappear in just 90 days. So, who came out on top? Farmers, industrial bosses, anyone with actual physical assets, really. This bloke, Hugo Stins, an industrialist, he borrowed marks early on, snapped up mines, ships, and newspapers, then paid back his loans weeks later for next to nix, because the loan was in marks, and they were basically worth bugger all. City folk who managed to survive would hop on a train and head out to the bush. The Germans even had a name for it, the hamster fart, or the hoarding trip, as they called it. They'd chuck household stuff into suitcases and swap it with the farmers. A grand piano for a bag of spuds, or a silver canteen for a slab of corned beef. So, which of the city mob did the best out of it all? The Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond had a squiz at the old records and came up with one dead-set conclusion. City slickers with family out in the country fared way better than those who didn't have any. Not gold, not even a bunker. Just a cousin on a farm in Brandenburg. That's what saved him. Alright, so that's Weimar done. Next up, Argentina, from 01 to 02. Righto. Back on the 1st of December 2000, the economy bloke brought in what the Argentines dubbed the corralito. That word, corralito, it just means a tiny yard, like a small pen, you know? Bank accounts got frozen solid, and you could only pull out 250 pesos a week, tops. Just 20 days on, after a fair dinkum ruckus in the streets, the president chucked it in. The country went through 5 different presidents in just 12 days. A real revolving door, eh? That peso-dollar peg, which had been holding steady since '91, finally snapped in January. By October 2002, folks who'd put their money in the bank had lost round about 60% of their savings, in dollar value. The poverty rate had shot up to 57.5%. A fair bit, that. 7 out of 10 Argentine kids were doing it tough. But the clever clogs who did all right kept actual dollars stashed away, outside the banks. The Argentines called these colchon dollars. Colchon means mattress, so yeah, mattress dollars. Fernando Aguirre, who wrote down how his family got through that rough patch, noticed that silver was actually handier than gold for everyday little buys. You can't exactly get change for a gold coin when all you're after is a dozen eggs, can you? So a swapping system popped up, using a local, homegrown currency they called the credito. Eventually, 2.5 million Argentines jumped on board with it. The ones who copped it sweet were the depositors who'd trusted the banks, the old-age pensioners, and the bondholders, who ended up taking a 76% hit in the 2005 shakeup. Makes sense, doesn't it? The way things are going is pretty obvious already. Savings in local currency just vanish into thin air. But real, physical stuff holds its value. Overseas cash and smaller notes are the bee's knees. Social networks step in to take the place of the usual market setups. Over in Venezuela, from 2013 till now, people's actual income has shrunk by about 3/4 since 2013. Crikey, that's the biggest economic meltdown we've seen in half a century that wasn't caused by a war. According to the economist Steve Hanke, hyperinflation hit its peak, a whopping 344,509% annually, back in January 2019. Nearly 8 million Venezuelans have done a runner, which makes it the biggest displacement drama in the whole Western Hemisphere. But even with all that, Caracas isn't like Sarajevo, you know? The government's still there, the coppers are still around, and Maduro's still calling the shots. This is a fair dinkum, top-notch, modern example of a Type 1 collapse. A massive economic disaster without a civil war kicking off. The government's a shocker, but it still actually works. Both those things are true at the same time, eh? What's actually doing the trick in Venezuela is US dollars. Maduro gave him the green light back in November 2019. Now, over half the local deals are done with American dollars. Money sent home from folks overseas adds up to more than $5 billion annually. For heaps of families, that's 80% of what they earn. Gold, the hand-mined stuff from the Arco Minero area, paid in tiny bits, now covers haircuts and tucker in the mining towns. A software engineer who's into RuneScape online pulls in more dough than a medical doctor. That's not just a figure of speech, mate, it's a proven fact. This bit's super important. A Type 1 collapse really helps out anyone with cash they can move around, a useful skill, and a network of mates that goes across borders. Lebanon, since October 2019, has been a bit of a schmozzle. On the 17th of October, a suggested tax on WhatsApp sparked huge protests. In just a few weeks, the banks brought in unofficial capital controls, not legally, but just by flat-out refusing to hand over people's cash. The black market exchange rate shot up from 15 lira to the dollar to around 89,000 lira to the dollar. By 2024, the lira had chucked away over 98% of its worth. Economist Dan Ozzie came up with a name for what happened to dollar deposits stuck in Lebanese banks. He called them lollers. A lollar is basically a dollar caught in the Lebanese banking system, only able to be swapped for lira at a rate the government picks, meaning you'd cop a haircut of about 70 to 85%. Roughly 80% of Lebanese ended up doing it tough. And here's the kicker I want you to keep in mind. This was all happening in 2019, before anyone outside the loop even realized something was crook. Over $10 billion did a sneaky exit from the country, stashed in the accounts of the big-shot depositors and those with political mates, all while the central bank boss was out there publicly saying no capital controls were on the way. Here's the go with a Type 1 collapse. The blokes with the inside scoop are the first to bail. The average punter with their savings just hangs around for the official word. And that reassurance is actually the sign that you've already missed the boat. Zimbabwe, from 2007 to 2008, hyperinflation went absolutely bonkers, hitting its highest point at about 79.6 billion% each month in November 2008, with prices going up double every 25 hours. That was the second worst hyperinflation ever recorded, only beaten by Hungary back in '46. They chucked the Zimbabwe dollar in April 2009. So what actually did the trick? US dollars, South African rand, cash sent home from the 3 to 4 million Zimbabweans who'd already done a runner, hand-mined gold, cattle out in the bush, women lugging goods across the border into South Africa on their backs and flogging them back in Zimbabwe. Even fuel coupons, priced in dollars, turned into a sort of unofficial money. What went pear-shaped? Anyone who had their savings in Zimbabwe dollars. Teachers and nurses didn't get paid for ages. The number of bubs dying doubled. Life expectancy dropped to 34 for women and 37 for men, the lowest figures globally back then. Righto, 5 economic meltdowns. And the same old yarn every single time. The blokes who always come out on top in any Type 1 collapse are those with actual foreign cash, gold in little bits, good land with proper ownership, skills you can take anywhere, and mates overseas. The ones who always get a raw deal are local currency savers, old-age pensioners, folks on fixed incomes, and bondholders. And anyone who put their faith in a formal outfit after it started publicly saying there was no drama? They were stuffed. All right, let's have a squiz at what goes down when we chuck the physics on its head. The siege of Leningrad went on for 872 days, from September 41 right through to January 44. Before the war, Leningrad had a population of about 3.2 million folks. During the siege, the number of deaths was somewhere between 1 million and 1.5 million. Just in January of 42 alone, 100,000 Leningraders kicked the bucket, mostly from being absolutely starving and freezing, not from bombs. The biggest thing that decided if you'd make it was getting out of there before the 8th of September 1941. That's when the German blokes properly shut off the area at Schlesselburg. Roughly 600,000 people managed to scarper before they sealed it off. Another million or so did a runner across the frozen Lake Ladoga during the 42 winter. Anyone who didn't get away was stuck living on rations. Factory workers copped 250 grams of bread a day. That's about the size of a little apple, eh? Office workers, kids, and anyone else relying on others only got 125 grams daily. That's a tiny sliver, full of wood pulp and sawdust. That's where the saying, 125 grams of hope actually started. Righto, here's the really important bit. Inside Leningrad, there was this mob of people who ended up being called the blockaded millionaires. Warehouse blokes, bakers, truckies on the ice road. Basically anyone who could get their hands on tucker. These fellas got fat as pigs while their neighbors were absolutely starving. And what did they take for a bit of bread, butter, and sugar? Gold, bling, furs, old stuff. First editions of Pushkin, research from St. Petersburg Uni. It all paints a picture of starving Leningraders who were gobsmacked by how healthy the counterstaff looked. The ones who were snapping up gold, jewelry, and furs for tucker. A whole mink coat would only get you one measly piece of bread. A sewing machine might snag you a few spuds, and the blokes with the gold, they ended up croaking it right next to their neighbors, 'cause gold's only good if someone's willing to swap it for something you actually need. And when there's nothing to buy, gold's just a bit of a shiny rock, isn't it? Have a squiz at the diaries of Alina Skriabina, a teacher from Leningrad who made it through the 12th of November, 1941. She penned, "I dropped in on a lady I know, and she let me have a go at one of her fancy food creations. A jelly made from leather belts. Folks were even chopping up their fancy parquet floors just to get some firewood. Crikey. 1,216 people were murdered just for their ration cards in the first 6 months of 1942. So, what actually saved the poor buggers who made it? Getting out before the ring closed in, snagging a factory job with access to grub, having a relative in the food chain, or just being tough enough to queue for 12 hours in minus 30 degrees Celsius. You couldn't buy any of that stuff, mate. It all came down to having connections already there before the whole shebang kicked off. That's Leningrad, which is Stalingrad these days. Stalingrad, from August 42 right through to February 43. Stalin knocked back evacuating the civilians, because he reckoned the factories had to keep chugging along. When the Luftwaffe dropped their bombs on the 23rd of August, 1942, doing 16 runs in just one day, 90% of Stalingrad's wooden houses went up in smoke. The number of civilians who died in that single week of bombing could have hit 40,000. When the Red Army took back the city in February 43, the officials found 9,976 civilians still alive amongst the rubble. 94 of them were kids. And out of those 94 kids, only 9 ever got back with their folks. There was no market in Stalingrad where you could swap gold for bread. In fact, there was hardly any bread at all. Gold didn't mean a thing. Where you were, that was the main game. The civilians who made it through were the ones who hid out in the city's deepest basements and didn't get knocked off before they were freed. Warsaw, August to October of 44. Hitler's order on the 1st of August was pretty grim. Every inhabitant should be killed. No prisoners are to be taken. In what they now call the Wola massacre, the SS murdered between 40 and 50,000 Polish civilians in just one district over 7 days. A German bloke's account from that area said, "They murdered, looted, and grabbed rings, jewels, watches, and gold. Get this, they robbed them first, then shot them." Having a bit of dough actually sped up their demise, instead of saving their bacon. Down at the Ochota transit camp, SS troops frisked every civilian at the gate for anything valuable before pushing them along. 150,000 civilians were killed in 63 days. Another 500,000 were sent off through the Prushkov transit camp after the uprising got squashed. The Germans spent 3 months blowing up Warsaw with dynamite. 75% of the city was absolutely rooted. Nah, the property didn't just drop in value. It literally just vanished, mate. This bloke, Ladislaus Spielmann, a pianist he was, managed to stick it out for 3 years, holed up in the ruins of Warsaw. He got through it partly because he was lucky, but the main reason he made it was that over 20 non-Jewish Poles kept him hidden, even though it put their own lives and families in serious danger. He didn't buy his way out with a stack of gold. Nah, people just looked after him, plain and simple. Righto, Berlin, April to May, 1945. The Red Army rocked up, a massive force of 1.5 million blokes. Later on, the Charity and August Victoria hospitals reckoned that a fair dinkum shocking number, somewhere between 95,000 and 130,000 women, were assaulted in Berlin, just in that one spot. Around 10,000 of them copped it from those attacks or took their own lives after the fact. This journo, Martha Hillers, she kept a diary while the occupation was on, and it later came out as A Woman in Berlin. She spilled the beans on what actually kept her going. Not gold, no worries. The Red Army just nicked all the watches, rings, and silver. And get this, they'd also pinched the porcelain within the first few hours of taking over any flat. Cash was no good. The Reichsmark had gone belly up. Smokes were the new dough, going for about 300 marks a packet. Forget about stashed food. The soldiers just found it and grabbed the lot. What really saved her bacon was knowing a language. She could speak Russian, which was pretty rare for a Berlin woman back then. She managed to sort out a Soviet major to be her personal protector, down there in her cellar. Groups of women would tip each other off, share secret spots behind fake walls, rub coal dust on their faces, and tie on headscarves to seem a bit older. Women on their lonesome had a much tougher time than those who stuck together in close-knit building groups. Reckon that makes sense, eh? This is a fair dinkum big deal. Whenever a military goes belly up, having solid human connections and being able to stay out of sight was way more crucial than having a pile of cash or valuables. These were the sorts of things that really came in handy when the economy went pear-shaped. Having gold just painted a target on your back for a robbery. A stack of it out in the open was like an invite for armed blokes to come knocking. If you had a permanent address, the enemy knew exactly where to track you down. No worries. Sarajevo, mate, that was a fair dinkum long one. 1,425 days. From April 92 right through to Feb 96. Reckon it was the longest a capital city's ever been under siege in modern time? They copped about 329 mortar shells every single day, on average. So, what was the go for cash in Sarajevo when it was under siege? Marlboro ciggies, believe it or not. Just one pack of those could snag you a few tins of humanitarian aid. If you had the local Drina ciggies, you'd swap 3 packs for 20 marks. People were even swapping gold rings just to get their hands on some eggs. A kilo of raw coffee, mate. That'd get you a 12-kilo propane bottle for keeping warm. But here's the real kicker for staying alive. Getting into that tunnel. Around mid-93, the Bosnian army engineers finally knocked off digging a tunnel right under the airport runway, which the UN blokes were holding. It was roughly 800 meters long, a meter wide, and about 1.5 meters high. When things were flat out, you'd have about 4,000 people and 20 tons of gear going through there every day. If you had a mate in the Bosnian army, or some cash for the guards, or even just some ciggies for the right bloke, that's what decided if you got your medicine. Where you were located really mattered too. Sniper Alley, that was a fair dinkum death trap. On the 12th of July, 93, 12 people got knocked off in just one water queue. So, who actually managed to get out of Sarajevo before the siege shut down completely? It was the ones with family living somewhere else, or those with foreign passports, or the smart cookies who saw the writing on the wall early. The siege finally wrapped up on the 2nd of May, 92. Folks who took off in March and April, they managed to hang on to their stuff. But the poor buggers who hung around till May, they lost the lot. Righto, now take a step back and have a squiz at the whole picture, eh? Right across those 5 military stuff-ups. Leningrad, Stalingrad, Warsaw, Berlin, Sarajevo. The blokes who always came out on top were the ones who skedaddled early. You know, the ones who were tucked away in the right spot, had heaps of mates, and were pretty much invisible to everyone. Folks who seemed too broke, too old, or too crook to even bother robbing. And well, the plain lucky ones. Not a single one of those things is something you can just buy with a bit of gold, mate. That's the big takeaway. And it's pretty much the exact opposite of what you'd learn from a Type 1 situation. Right, let's properly compare them now, because this is where most people miss the boat. A Type 1 collapse. That's where being settled, having a bit of visible work going on, and stashing away wealth that looks bog standard to others really pays off. You want to look like a bit of a daggy neighbor with a veggie patch, eh? You'll want local connections, a skill your community actually needs, and some gold coins tucked away nicely. With a Type 2 collapse, it's all about being able to move, staying out of sight, and having social connections that no one can pinch off you at a checkpoint. You want to appear like you've got bugger all, and be ready to pack up and go when the time comes. You'll need mates in more than just one place, you know, spread out a bit. These two approaches are pretty much chalk and cheese, completely different ways of doing things. Fernando Aguirre, who wrote about his family making it through in Argentina, and Selko Begovic, who got through the Sarajevo siege, are the two blokes the prepper mob talk about the most when it comes to survivors. They're at loggerheads on nearly every tactical thing, and there's a fair dinkum reason why. See, they went through different sorts of collapses, that's why. Fal reckons you should stick around, use US dollars, set up a little business, and keep a low profile. Selko, on the other hand, says, get out early or don't bother at all. Chuck on some plain gray threads. No fancy logos or any of that tactical gear. Team up with your neighbors and all bunk down in one building. Chuck your tucker in little stashes, mate. Don't just leave it all in one big pile where everyone can see it. They're both spot on with what they reckoned they saw, but if you try to use one's advice for the other, you'll be barking up the wrong tree. The big stack. So, how do you reckon you'll know which kind of stack you're up against? That's the knack we all need to get our heads around, together. The signs that the economy's about to go belly up usually pop up months, sometimes even years before it happens. I'll give you the lowdown on them. First up, it's the difference between the official exchange rate and what you'd get on the black market. Over in Venezuela, this gap blew out from about 2-to-1 in 2010 to a whopping 10-to-1 by the end of 2013. But in Lebanon, it just popped up out of nowhere, practically overnight, back in October 2019. When the official rate and the street rate start looking heaps different, that's your first clue, mate. Next up, keep an eye on the central bank's foreign cash drying up. They usually chuck out the figures for this every month. If those reserves dip under what's needed for 3 months of imports, you're probably looking at a currency crisis within a year and a half. The third sign is what the bigwigs are actually doing, not just what they're rabbiting on about. Lebanese insiders pulled out over $10 billion in 2019, even though the central bank boss was publicly saying no way to capital controls. Over in Argentina, big chunks of dollar deposits scarpered from the banks in the months leading up to the Corralito. The rich and well-connected types always do a runner before anyone officially spills the beans when things go pear-shaped. Keep an eye out for a brain drain, middle-class pros doing a bolt, and cash suddenly flying out of the country. And the fourth sign? That's when the big bosses officially deny everything. When the finance minister rocks up for a presser, telling everyone their savings are sweet as, that's your cue to get cracking. Righto, These are the signs for a Type 1 situation. You could have a fair few months or even a couple of years, mate. There's a fair bit of time on the clock. Now, the signs for a Type 2 collapse are a whole different kettle of fish, and you won't have much time. First up, keep an eye out for troops piling up near borders or in dodgy areas. Russia, for example, had a massive 175,000 troops lined up near Ukraine's border by the end of 2021. The second sign is when you see paramilitaries kitted out with weapons, but they're not part of the official government setup. The Bosnian Serb militias were getting themselves organized and armed right through the 91-92 winter. The Serbian Democratic Party gave the heads up to Sarajevo Serbs to clear out on April 4th, 1992. Then, the very next day, the shelling kicked off. Thirdly, look for a growing trend of mid-level pollies, journos, and judges getting knocked off. Not just a one-off, but a pattern over a few weeks. The fourth sign is when governments start handing out weapons to civilians, but only to certain groups. Once the government starts dishing out weapons to one ethnic or political mob and not the others, well, the whole "only we do violence" thing is already cactus. The fifth thing to watch for is foreign embassies pulling out their non-essential staff. This one's usually the last public warning before time runs out. Fair dinkum. Embassies have their own intel blokes, so they'll be clued in way before you are. Alright, here's a bit of a guide for you. 13 questions you can whip through in about 15 minutes. First up, are the courts still doing their thing, even if they're a bit dodgy? Second, is the violence just blokes taking a chance? Or is it proper organized fighting? Righto. Number 3, are the coppers in the army getting their pay and doing their jobs? Or are they bailing out because of their mob or politics? Number 4, are the overseas embassies pulling their staff out? 5, are the borders open for a gander? Or are they all militarized? Are the banks open for business with a few rules? Or are they completely shut? Is the main water and sewage system actually working, even if it's on and off? Is there a proper armed resistance fighting the government, with uniforms and their own patch of land? Can you see any military gear piling up from outside? Is the violence hitting anyone at random? Or are they going after particular groups of people? Is the money just going through the roof with hyperinflation? Or have they chucked it for ciggies and bullets? Are pollies and journos getting knocked off more and more often? Is the government giving weapons to regular folks based on their mob? If questions 1 to 7 start going pear-shaped, but 8 to 13 are still sweet as, you're in Type 1. You've got a bit of time. Hang on to your assets, keep your gig, switch to US dollars, and build up your contacts. Just stay put. But if any of questions 8, 9, 12, or 13 suddenly turn to, yeah, you're in Type 2, or heading that way, the best thing to do is leg it. Reckon that's clear? Righto, here's the real kicker you should be worried about. Some Type 1 meltdowns turn into Type 2, and that's when most families kick the bucket. Yugoslavia went from Type 1 to Type 2 in about 3 years. Money went bonkers in the late 80s, blokes stirring up ethnic trouble by 87, private armies popping up by 90, and Sarajevo was under siege by 92. Syria changed over in 9 months. Dry paddocks and people getting moved on, then protest arrests in March 2011, and then a full-blown civil war by December. Lebanon flipped in 1975 in just a few weeks. A Fisho strike in Feb, then that Enel Remene bus got hit on April the 13th. Militia checkpoints popped up in days. That pivot window, the time from when things clearly change to when you can't get out, is usually 30 to 90 days. Sorry Evans, who did a runner in February 92, managed to hang on to their stuff. The blokes who hung around till May, well, they lost the lot. The families who managed to turn things around successfully all had a few things in common. Up-to-date passports, a particular spot to go to with someone waiting for them, and cash they could carry, like coins, hard currency, or these days, a hardware cryptocurrency wallet. They had a list written down of 3 particular things that meant they were out of there this week. Not waiting for another harvest, mate. And when those things happened, they scarpered. They didn't dither about it, no worries. They just copped it sweet. What was lost was lost. They left behind the old place, the food cupboard, and the woodpile. Dunno if I'm spot on that everyone reading this yarn will cop a collapse. Hope they don't, eh? But I reckon it's fair dinkum that not telling the difference between these 2 collapse types has been the biggest stuff-up, strategically, in how modern survivalists think. Righto, I'll tell you what you should actually get stuck into, 'cause some preps work for both kinds of collapses. And that's the short list where you should chuck your time and cash. First cab off the rank is skills that are worth something outside the usual money caper. A plumber can get a gig in Argentina, and a doctor in Sarajevo. Well, they're needed everywhere. Someone who can fix a diesel donk will snag a job if a Type 1 collapse hits. And they'll be looked after in a Type 2 situation. Your skills are the only thing no one can nick off you. Next up is being fit. Not just tactical training, but proper physical fitness. Being able to walk 16 clicks with a 9-kilo pack, being able to stand in line for 3 hours, or lug water from half a click away. Back in Leningrad, the first ones to kick the bucket were the oldies, the big blokes, and the sick ones. With the German expulsion columns in '45, historians reckon it was the same story. Being fit is the least flash survival prep, but it's always shown to be the real decider. Fair dinkum. Go for a walk every day, mate. Righto, the third thing, mate, is having solid relationships that are a bit thick on the ground, go both ways, and you've already built them up in a few different spots. Like a cousin who's a farmer out past your city limits, a mate overseas with a spare room, or a neighbor you've given a hand to before you even needed a favor yourself. Spillman made it through Warsaw because 20 people put their lives on the line for him. Fair dinkum. He'd spent yonks building up those connections well before the war kicked off. The fourth thing, is having wealth that's easy to move around. Not some old crate of gold bars buried in the backyard. Think fractional gold coins, little bits of silver, solid foreign cash, and small notes. And for folks scattered around especially, a hardware crypto wallet that's hooked up. These things can get through checkpoints. You can swap them at any exchange, and they'll work a treat in places like Venezuela and Lebanon. And in any Type 1 stuff-up, you're probably gonna cop, all right? So, those 4 things. Your skills, being fit, your connections, and wealth you can easily move around. That's the quick rundown. All the other stuff, the tactical vest, the hidden bunker, the pantry stocked for 5 years, the arsenal you can see. That's more about the story than the actual setup, really. Some of that's a bit handy in a Type 1 situation, but bugger all of it helps in a Type 2. The sorry Evans who made it through didn't look like they were prepped. They just looked like everyone else. That was the clever bit. So here's what I reckon you should do this week. Grab a bit of paper, jot down the 13 questions from this episode, then check out the news in your own country or area and answer each one fair dinkum. Chuck a date up the top of the page. Do this again in 30 days. You're not trying to get spooked. You're just trying to see which way the wind's blowing, whether things are looking up or going pear-shaped. That habit, that honest monthly check-in, is worth way more than any bit of gear you'll ever splash out on. And this weekend, just one physical thing. Go for a decent stroll, further than you reckon you can handle, in the actual shoes you've got. That walk'll give you the dinkum oil about how ready you actually are. That bag in the cupboard isn't the fix for every stuff-up. The gold in the safe isn't the fix for every stuff-up either. Yeah, a homestead with a full pantry and a trusty rifle by the door. That's a ripper solution for one type of drama, but it's a death sentence for a couple of others. Both blokes got ready, right? But only one made it through. It wasn't about how good their prep was, nah. It was all about the kind of meltdown they copped, and if their planning actually suited it. So, keep an eye on the signs, eh? Make sure your prep fits your actual surroundings, and get those 4 key assets sorted that'll see you through anything. See, the future ain't just one thing, mate. It's actually like 2 totally different headaches, scientifically speaking. And the biggest call you'll ever make is figuring out which one of those you're actually trying to sort out. Next time around, I want to show you the skills that really count for both kinds of meltdowns. The ones history consistently proves are fair dinkum lifesavers. And I'll show you how someone who's never farmed, never tinkered with an engine, or never even patched up a wound can start picking up those skills in just one weekend. Just be careful out there, eh?